Welcome to Justice Matters. I'm Denise George, Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Justice Matters is a program aimed to inform, engage, and empower you with knowledge of Virgin Islands laws that affect our everyday lives and our community. We have insightful discussions with special guests on the laws and related topics so you can be empowered to make a difference in our community. Today's topic is about the medical doctors in law enforcement, namely medical examiners. These are the forensic pathologists, medical doctors who investigate deaths, including homicides, suicides, and deaths under unusual circumstances, right here in the Virgin Islands, within the Department of Justice Office of the Attorney General. Joining us later will be the medical examiner serving the Virgin Islands for many years, having testified in hundreds of homicide cases in the Virgin Islands courts, to give us more insight on what a medical examiner does. One thing to note here is that the powers and duties of the medical examiner are defined in Virgin Islands law. First of all, the medical examiner is a government law enforcement official that must be duly licensed to practice medicine in the Virgin Islands. Among the powers and duties required by law are to investigate the death of every person dying within the Virgin Islands or whose body is found within the Virgin Islands, which is or appears to be a violent death, whether by criminal violence, suicide, or casualty, a death caused by unlawful act or criminal neglect, a death occurring in a suspicious, unusual, or unexplained manner, a death caused by suspected criminal abortion, a death of a person confined to a public institution that's not a hospital, infirmary, or nursing home. And the ME's other duties are prescribed by the governor or the attorney general. The medical examiner has wide investigative powers. The law says the ME must fully investigate the essential facts concerning the death when called to the scene and before leaving the premises. That includes reducing all such facts to writing and taking possession of any portable object which, in the ME's opinion, may be useful in establishing the cause or manner of death. In the course of the investigation, the medical examiner is required to make examinations such as autopsies if, in the medical examiner's opinion, it is necessary to establish the cause or manner of death. Also, to move, retain, and transport any tissue or organs for examination. As a part of the ME's law enforcement powers, VI law gives the medical examiner, quote, the power to subpoena and examine witnesses under oath in the same manner as a court, end quote. While many of you may remember the popular TV series starring a medical examiner called Quincy, joining me is our own medical examiner, Dr. Francisco Landron, a forensic pathologist. Well, welcome to Justice Matters, Dr. Landron.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, AG.
Okay. I want to ask you to explain in your own words to the audience, what is a medical examiner?
Well, the medical examiner, first and foremost, is a doctor. Mm-hmm. He's a physician. So after he does, usually in most cases, 4 years of college with a bachelor's in science, mm-hmm. then he goes on to medical school, does 4 years of medical school, then goes through a residency in pathology, which is a specialty of medicine. And pathology is the specialty that deals with the origin of diseases, which is known as the etiology, how diseases, where they come from, how they manifest themselves in the body, which is known as the pathogenesis, the changes they produce in the body, in your organs, in your cells, and then how those changes manifest themselves clinically. So once you go through 4 years of that specialty, you do an extra year mm-hmm. in the subspecialty of forensic pathology, which
and that's where most of the medical examiners, right. At least ours, is the forensic pathologist.
Correct.
What is that? What is the forensic pathologist?
Well, the forensic pathologist, once you reach that point, the major duties of the forensic pathologist or medical examiner's office is to determine the cause and the manner of death. And then there are other things that are important. For example, in all cases, the body hasn't been identified. So you have to identify the body, and we do identification by scientific methods, which are fingerprints, dental records, x-rays, or DNA. And then in some instances where none of that is available, we can identify by circumstantial evidence.
And what kind of circumstantial evidence if the body is not identifiable?
If the body had a wallet, a license, or the keys to his car, different types of circumstantial evidence that can help you with the identification. Then we try to determine the time and the time of death, which is done through post-mortem changes such as livor mortis, rigor mortis, and algor mortis, which is the temperature.
Well, what's the rigor mortis?
Rigor mortis is the stiffening of the body. The muscles become very rigid and hard, and it goes through different phases. And livor mortis is the blood settling to the dependent portions of the body by the force of gravity. And then when they're set, they will stay fixed in that position. But if not enough time has passed, they can be changed to a different position.
I see.
So those are identification, time of death. We try to document all the injuries that are on the body and try to deduce how they might have occurred. We also collect evidence from the body, like bullets, for example. We try to determine if there's any natural disease present that might have contributed to the death. And last but not least, we go to courts to provide expert witness testimony whenever it's needed.
Right, for the investigation that you do. So basically, it's a death investigation.
Correct.
That the forensic pathologists do. So you are a forensic pathologist, correct?
Correct.
Now, when you say cause and manner of death, okay, first of all, what is the difference? What does it mean when you talk about the cause of death? And what does it mean when you talk about the manner of death?
Well, the cause of death is the injury or the disease that sets in motion a sequence of events, of physiological events in your body that in turn lead to the death. Those physiological derangements are known as the mechanism of death. So cause, mechanism of death, and then manner of death is the opinion of the medical examiner when he gets all the information surrounding the circumstances surrounding the death. So once he's clear on what happened with this body, the circumstances surrounding the body, with his autopsy report and findings, he'll reach a conclusion as to the manner of death. And in forensic pathology, medical examiners use 5 manners of death: homicide, accident, suicide, natural, or undetermined, if we don't have enough information to put it in one of the other 4 categories.
I see. So that's so 5 categories. 5 categories of manner of death.
That's correct.
Are there categories of cause of death? Like, give an example of when you say cause of death is one thing and manner of death is another. Give an example.
A cause of death would be a gunshot wound to the chest.
Right.
Or it could be an adenocarcinoma of the lung. Or it could be drowning. So all those are causes of death.
And then manner of death then. So let's say you have a cause of death. That's a gunshot wound to the chest, as you just said. What could be the manner of death then in that case?
Well, it's interesting because you can have a single cause of death and 5 manners of death with that cause. For example, a contact gunshot wound to the temple, to the head, might be a homicide. If somebody did it to the person, it might be suicide if he did it himself. It might be accidental. He was fooling around or playing like Russian roulette, and you want to rule it as accidental in that situation. And it might be undetermined if you don't have enough information to know exactly which one of those 3
Which one of those?
was.
Like one. Right. Okay.
So one cause can have different manners.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And what are the types of equipment and procedures that are used by the medical examiner when they're doing these investigations of the body to make these determinations?
Well, the equipment we use is in our morgue. We have 2 autopsy tables.
Mm-hmm.
We have a morgue cooler which can hold up, I think, at least 20 bodies. We have X-ray machines, and we have all the equipment necessary to do a proper autopsy dissection of the body. Mm-hmm. We have storage capacity in cases that we might keep some tissue for further examination later on. And we also, although we don't have a toxicology lab, we routinely, in most homicides and accidents, or in all homicides and accidents, we retain fluids, body fluids, which is blood, urine, bile, and even in a case that's in advanced decomposition, we can save certain body parts that are still available, such as a piece of muscle.
Okay. Well, tell me something. So you do all of these things, but what about the staff at the medical examiner's office? What are I know we have forensic technicians. What are their roles with respect to their assistance or support to the medical examiners?
Right. Well, the forensic technician is the assistant. He's the person that helps me perform the autopsy. Mm-hmm. And then we also have forensic investigators, mm-hmm. which in our system, most of the calls that come to the medical examiner's office they arrive first at the investigators. I mean, police are notified first, police notify the investigators. Then they'll go out to the scene. There are eyes and ears. They will gather information for us and give us a report of the scene and bring the body back to the morgue.
Okay. And those are the investigators or forensic technicians that actually what you see sometimes if people are on the scene, you see when the medical examiner is called out, and those are the persons in the, yes. in the wagon, and then be able to get the body and preserve the body.
Exactly.
So, and we have that there too. Okay. And what types of things you have to make determinations at a certain point with respect to what types of things you would do as a medical examiner to investigate. And one of them is autopsies. Are autopsies always given, always done or performed, or is that only under certain circumstances based on your discretion? How is that done?
Right. Well, autopsies are not always performed in all the cases that we investigate. Now, there are certain cases where autopsies are mandatory, such as all homicides, all accidents, most suicides, and some natural deaths are autopsy. The ones that are natural are usually what we call suspicious, sudden, or unexpected deaths, mm-hmm. where people that are out about in the community who weren't seeing a doctor, and they're not, of a sufficient advanced stage where we could explain the death without an autopsy. So those are also autopsies.
So explain how is an autopsy done and then a diagnosis made? Just kind of take us through it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the autopsy has 2 big parts to it. First is the external examination, mm-hmm. where we gather, the height, the weight, the eye color, the hair color, any unusual markings on the skin, on the body, any injuries, any tattoos, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then we proceed to the internal examination, which is dissection of every organ, or not in all cases, because sometimes you can get away with a partial autopsy if you see the exact cause of death that you're mm-hmm. sure 100%, you can stop at that point in some of the natural deaths. Mm-hmm. So, but the way that you approach the autopsy is the way that you're taught to practice medicine. For example, a patient goes to his doctor's office. The doctor, the first thing he'll do is get a history. He'll interview the patient, get the history. Well, in our case, our history we get from the scene. We get from family members, from police, from witnesses, anybody that can shed a light on what transpired. So that's our history. Now, the patient in the doctor's office, once he gives the history, the doctor will perform a physical examination. That's the part where we would do an autopsy.
Right.
Now, with also when you go to a doctor, he might order some lab tests or some tests to arrive at his diagnosis. So we do the autopsy, and we will order maybe toxicology or do other special studies or histology, and then arrive at our diagnosis. So it's the same sequence of events as a regular doctor would do.
Oh, okay. So, and then you make your diagnosis.
Correct.
Sometimes it takes a while, and sometimes people will ask, well, it takes long sometimes after, let's say an autopsy is done or after there's a fatality, and then to get from the medical examiner's office the actual cause and manner of death. What are some of the reasons why it might take a while?
Well, some cases are more complicated, more complex than others. In a simple case, we usually will try to get the case out within a month and a half. But some cases we need to do histology, that means microscopic studies that might take a longer time. We might have to do a more complex toxicology test instead of the regular basic forensics, which looks for certain drugs and certain medicines, versus some other more elite or more esoteric toxicology tests for certain types of poisons. And other times we just don't have the information that we need to close the case. The investigation is incomplete. So, for example, even for something like we were discussing a while ago, like a gunshot wound to the head, we might wait 2 or 3 months to clear up the circumstances. Was it a suicide? Was it a homicide? And if we don't have that information, we'll wait a little bit longer for that. So there are certain cases where, by necessity, the case will take longer.
How does I guess that depends on complexity then, really, when you think about it, and trying to figure out what is the cause and manner. But how does the medical examiner's office work with the police? I mean, we know that the prosecutors, you're in the prosecutor's office, the attorney general's office, but what is the relationship with the medical examiners and the police investigator?
Right. Well, the police are always in charge of the scene investigation. They're the major player at the scene. The medical examiner's office goes in and gets information from police, and in some instances shares information with the police at the scene. Now, the police will always attend the cases such as homicide. They'll attend some accidents, traffic accidents, for example. Traffic police will always be present. So they'll see the autopsy. They will get information from us, which will help them in their investigation. And they will give us information sometimes that will help us deduce what happened with the autopsy findings. So it's a very good working relationship. We try not to step on their toes at the scene, and they try not they try to let us participate of the scene as much as possible as well.
And essentially, especially as you said, when we're dealing with the homicide cases in particular, and it eventually goes to prosecution, what are the areas and what is the role, I should say, with respect to the medical examiner when a case does go to prosecution and when there is a trial, a homicide trial?
Yeah, well, whenever we have to go to court, one of the most important steps is obviously we have to share all the information of the autopsy with the prosecutor. And then ideally, you will have a pre-trial conference where you'll get together with the prosecutor and go over the findings, and the prosecutor will let you know anything that bothers him about the case or any information that he's unsure of, and you'll try to clear that up with him. And then after the pretrial conference, you just go to court and get called and testify. Okay.
Well, you have you prepare an autopsy report, correct? Or
that's correct.
Is that what's prepared? Is it a complete cause and manner of death report, or does it just relate mainly only to the autopsy? Describe what the autopsy report is.
The autopsy report will have both the cause and the manner of death.
Okay.
Always.
Okay. And do
Yes.
the autopsy reports include all other aspects of the investigation, if there were toxicology tests or any other type of examination?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
There'll be a separate toxicology report.
Mm-hmm.
As I said before, we have to send our tox off island.
Mm-hmm.
We use a very well-known national toxicology lab, National Medical Services,
Mm-hmm.
and they will issue us a separate report, which we incorporate into our autopsy report.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when you do that, you do the autopsy report, you have the cause and manner of death, it goes to trial. How essential do you see the medical examiner's office in that trial from your standpoint with respect to establishing the cause of death?
Well, it's crucial. In some cases, it's indispensable.
Mm-hmm.
For example, let's say you have a case where there's a gunshot wound to the back, and somebody has ruled that it was a suicide. And from my findings, I would go to court and say it's impossible for the characteristics that this gunshot wound has on the back, being a long-range shot, that this person might have been able to inflict it himself. So obviously, this is not a suicide; it's a homicide. So there's a clear distinction. So if I didn't go to court and stipulate the difference between these type of injuries, then you might charge somebody who's innocent, or whoever is guilty get away.
And how long have you been at this? I didn't, maybe I should ask you at the beginning, but how long have you been as acting and performing in your job as a medical examiner?
Well, I started my training in forensics in 1984 through 1985 at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner and Coroner of Los Angeles County in California. Then I went and practiced about 5 years as a forensic pathologist medical examiner at the Institute of Forensic Sciences of Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. After that, I went into sort of private practice for a few years until I got a call from St. Thomas to do, a forensic autopsy. They liked what I did. They called me back again and then offered me the job. Mm. So I've been in St. Thomas since 1994. That's 28 years now.
That's quite some time.
Yes.
That's quite some time. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's very, very informative as a medical examiner here in the Virgin Islands for so many years. Thank you again. Yeah. Okay. Now, we do not have a coroner system in the Virgin Islands. We have a medical examiner. But have you ever wondered what's the difference between a coroner and a medical examiner? Well, here are a few differences. A coroner is a person who is elected or appointed to investigate the cause of death of a person within his jurisdiction. A medical examiner, on the other hand, is a medical doctor who is appointed to examine the cause of death of a person. A coroner is required to know anatomy, physiology, information gathering, rules of evidence, and investigation techniques, whereas a medical examiner is required to have a bachelor's and master's degree in medicine, pathology, residency, and fellowship in a forensic pathology, along with certification and licensure. A coroner does not perform an autopsy. A medical examiner performs autopsies. A coroner need not be a pathologist. A medical examiner, however, is required to be a pathologist or a forensic pathologist. And a coroner is either elected or appointed. A medical examiner is not elected, but always appointed. The medical examiner's office is such an integral part of the Department of Justice because it plays an important role in the investigation and the prosecution of homicides. Medical examiners are key witnesses in every single homicide prosecution that we do. The medical examiner's office just takes it to a new level so that we can preserve and enhance the integrity of not only the medical examiner investigations, but homicide prosecutions as well. The Department of Justice's medical examiner's office, located on St. Thomas, includes an autopsy suite, morgue, and offices for the medical examiners and staff. And that staff includes the medical or the forensic technicians as well as the medical legal investigators. The office is outfitted with 2 autopsy tables, an x-ray machine, a 20-body cooler, which holds up to 40 bodies, a visitor's family room, observation and identification room, officers for both medical examiners, and handicap accessible bathrooms with a locker, shower, washer, dryer, and backup generators. The parking lot has enough space to add at least 2 40-foot trailers, allowing for the staff to quickly respond if we have a mass casualty event. The office has a private and secure setting that is conducive to the work of forensic pathologists who work there. In criminal cases, it's especially critical to limit the amount of access to any evidence that may be used at a trial. The medical examiners are the forensic pathologists for the DOJ, and they serve as key witnesses in all homicide prosecutions in the Virgin Islands. The enhancements in size of the medical examiner's office also addresses the problem of available space, which was previously experienced at the hospital. So although the lab is outfitted with new equipment, it does not include a toxicology lab. So therefore, samples are sent away to a reputable forensic lab. It is hopeful, however, I would say that a lab will be considered somewhere in the future, as it will be great to have one. But it does entail a whole lot of different forensic science trained personnel, a toxicology lab, and equipment that can be quite costly. The ME's office often works in tandem with the VI Police Department. We utilize the facility for their homicide and accident investigations. The facility also serves as a training for law enforcement officers in areas such as anatomy, mechanism of injuries, and methods of collecting evidence. Funding is so important to get things done and to get the things that we need. Funding for the medical examiner's office and the autopsy suite was provided through a grant from the U.S. Department of Justice's Justice Assistant Grant Program in the form of a sub-grant from the Law Enforcement Planning Commission and direct funding from the National Institute of Justice. The generator was purchased with funds from the Homeland Security Grant Program through the Virgin Islands Territorial Emergency Management Agency, or VITEMA. And then the grant funds had also been used to purchase supplies such as body bags, protective gowns, face and eye protective shields, and surgical equipment in order to perform autopsies. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Justice Matters. Stay safe and stay well.